What is up, current tech fans? Welcome back to another garage tinkering video. I'm very honored to be able to bring you a worldwide first look at the new development board and screen from Waveshare, the ESP32 P4 powered 3.4-inch round screen, which could well be the best board and screen combo that exists so far to make gauges for your car. We're going to take a look at the hardware, what's on the board, some tech specs, and then actually make and run a demo on it and see if it solves some of the problems that we get on a similar setup that utilizes an ESP32 S3. So let's start by taking a look at the screen, the board that accompanies it, and then a few of the technical specifications. When we open up the box to this 3.4-inch round screen, not only do we have the screen and board bundle, but we have this massive speaker that comes with it too. Definitely the largest one of these things that I've seen in a bundle package like this. It's ready to crank some bass. The screen that has been paired with this board is a 3.4-inch 800 by 800 resolution IPS round touchscreen. It's powered by a 2-lane MIPI DSi LCD interface and obviously features this large touch bezel around the outside of the screen, which empowers the actual touch portion of this thing to work. When you compare the screen to a true 3.4-inch like this one by View eDisplay, you can see that it's quite a lot larger, and the actual working diameter is closer to 4.5 inches. So that is something you need to consider if you want to integrate this into your car project or whatever it might be. As well as this 3.4-inch display, there's also a 4-inch which has been released, but I'm still waiting on one. They've literally come out in the last days, so my first look is on the way, but it looks exactly the same as this, just a slight bit bigger. So if we just hold it closer, that's kind of what it'll look like. But from a technical perspective, it's still exactly the same. It's a 2-lane MIPI DSi and it's 800 by 800 pixel resolution. On the back, the board is initially protected, but once we remove this screen, we reveal this ESP32 P4 powered LCD driver board. At the heart of the board is the ESP32 P4 NRW32, which houses a massive 32-bit RISC-V dual-core processor for the high-performance system, which has DSP along with FPU and operates at a frequency up to 400 megahertz, as well as housing a low-power system, which is another 32-bit single-core RISC-V processor, which has a frequency up to 40 megahertz when you want to do operations that require very little power, kind of running in like a standby mode. Alongside the P4 is an ESP32C6, which is predominantly used as a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth coprocessor and expands the connectivity out to bring in Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5 in an SDIO connection to the P4. There was some debate on one of my previous videos about whether or not this separation of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi from the P4 itself was a good or a bad thing. And the consensus seems to be that actually by separating it out and having the P4 being the thing that powers the display and kind of like the processing of all that, and the C6 being there pretty much entirely just for the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi connectivity, means that though not only is a separation of concerns when it comes to actually powering things, meaning like if you're running, let's say, LVGL, which can be quite resource intensive on the P4, then the C6 can do its connectivity with things like ESP-NOW or whatever connectivity you might be using. And the two don't affect each other. They can run at their most optimum and then just pass the information between each other that they need. It also means you can do true air gapping and remove the system entirely from being able to be connected to by Bluetooth and Wi-Fi if you require that. So from a security perspective, it's actually quite a good way of doing things. As well as processing power, this thing also has a decent amount of memory available. For the high power system, we've got 128 kilobytes of system read-only memory, as well as 768 kilobytes of L2 memory. And for the low power system, we've got 16 kilobytes of system read-only memory and 32 kilobytes of low power SRAM. On top of that, we're boasting a huge 32 meg of PS RAM and a QSPI interface, which is connected to the additional 32 meg NOR flash. This is a godsend for using screens like this for things like LVGL, which require large frame buffers in order to optimize on the redraws. 32 meg should give us loads of overhead and mean that we get some really smooth animations on our screens, which we'll see later. Hopefully, assuming all this goes correctly. Looking around the board, we've got a bunch of useful inputs and outputs that we can utilize for our project. We've got this MIPI CSI interface designed for 15-pin MIPI two-lane cameras, the type of cameras that we typically utilize with a Raspberry Pi, which wouldn't really be supported by any other Arduino chips because they just couldn't handle it. Down at the bottom, we've got not one, but two onboard SMD microphones, which allows us to capture stereo sound, but it's also paired with this ES-8311 low-power audio codec, which does all the audio encoding and decoding, but also an ES-7210 echo cancellation chip, which helps improve the quality of the audio acquisition and eliminate echo whenever it's presented. We've obviously got your standard Type-C interfaces with the USB and the UART connectors, as well as sockets for RTC and an additional UART for the C6. We've obviously got a little slot for our massive speaker. And finally, this 40-pin socket interface. It's a standard 2.54mm spacing, and the pins are actually compatible with some Raspberry Pi hat extension boards, though you're probably going to need a pin header adapter in order to fully utilize that. But otherwise, it brings a load of different GPIOs available to you for whatever you want to use them for. The final thing is a TF card slot, SDIO3. Obviously really important if you want to add things like, I know, big animated GIFs or stuff like that to your screen that isn't going to fit in the internal memory. Plus, we can utilize it for things like firmware updates and not having to, remove whatever we've installed in the car out to a computer or take a laptop into the car, whatever it might be. The thing that's most impressive about this setup, I think, is the fact that the MIPI CSI inputs can capture 1080p HD at 30 FPS. And given that it supports onboard H.264 and JPEG encoding, means we can do some really impressive things with cameras and with imagery, and is definitely something we're going to be taking a look at very, very soon. In fact, I've got a box of cameras sitting around because we need to create side and rear view cameras for my car. Can we do it with an Arduino ecosystem? I think now with this, we can. The screen display interface also has integrated pixel processing acceleration and 2D graphics acceleration, which does JPEG image decoding again at 1080p 30 FPS. I'm sure you can imagine all the cool ways that we're going to be able to utilize something like that. But up until this point, all we've really done is read a spec sheet. It doesn't actually show us what it's like to use. So let's take a look at actually creating something very simple with it. And then, like I say, we can compare it to something very similar on an S3 and see if it picks up any of those capability shortfalls that we were having a problem with in a few of my previous videos. In fact, you can watch this one about LVGL and how to maximize it and some of the problems that we get when sending data to it via ESP-NOW. But when you pick one of these things up out of the box, it utilizes the same mobile phone simulation design that comes on the 7 and the 10-inch P4 powered dev boards. But it's clearly not optimized for a round display, and I'll be honest, doesn't look great. I'm sure, though, the guys at Waveshare are producing something that is utilized for it. It's just not ready yet. So let's make something, add it to the board and see how it gets on. Like I say, some things that we've tried previously that we've had problems with the ESP32 S3 is the capability to not only have large areas of redraw happening at once on the screen. Let's say you've got a number of big arcs, so there's lots of areas of redraw happening on the screen simultaneously. That can cause large frame rate drop-offs. But also when we're trying to send data to it via ESP-NOW, the fact that it's trying to balance the ESP-NOW information coming in and the LVGL redraws, even when we're properly utilizing the dual core of the S3, just can't stand up to it properly, which is why in the boards that I've designed, which we're going to use for part of the comparison side of this demonstration, we've got onboard CAN because it takes away that necessity to have incoming wireless data pinging away in the background, and we just do it straight into hardware CAN, which is much, much quicker. So I'm going to quickly make a bit of demo code in ESP-IDF, which is all that this currently supports. Arduino IDE support and Platform EO, I have been informed, are weeks away. So it's not months, it's like literally on the verge of coming out. But for now, everything's in ESP-IDF. But then we'll run some comparisons with a similar bit of code on the S3 and see how the two of them perform. Right, so I've been playing with this for a few hours, and I've decided I'm just going to put the ESP-NOW consideration stuff aside for the time being. The examples out there for actually properly utilizing ESP-NOW between the C6 and the P4 are basically non-existent at the moment, as is most of the documentation for the P4 right now. So I could bang my head against a wall for a number of hours or days trying to just get all that right, but for now, let's just concentrate on the LVGL rendering side of stuff for the things that I'm interested in, and I think a lot of you are, which is creating custom car gauges and informative ways of showing data. So I've made a quick example, and I'm just going to show it on an S3 versus a P4, and we can quite clearly see a bit of a difference. Check this out. So here's my little example, and this is just running on version 1 of my Ultimate Gauge board. If you're interested in these, version 1.1, which has got a bunch more stuff and is way cooler, is still available for pre-order. Pre-order actually closes a week after next. So if you do want to get these perfect boards for these little 2.1-inch screens and some special screens, details are all available at garagetinkering.com. But this is not about that right now. In the example that I've created here, we're using LVGL's scales, and there's a scale around the outside edge that runs from 0 to 160. Then I've created an arc that goes over the top. It's got a width of 40. And as we can see, as it goes from 0 up to 160, it starts blue at the bottom, and then between 50 and 80 fades from blue to green, stays green till it hits whatever I changed it to 110, and then from 110 to 140, I think, changes from green to red, and then 140 onwards is red. And what that does is I've deliberately done something I knew would slow the S3 down because of the full color change that happens throughout the entire arc means that the buffer is the full size of this screen. And it means it slows the performance right down. As you can see, it's only doing 7 frames a second at 96% CPU. And you can quite clearly see the steps in the animation. It's taking 130 milliseconds to draw each frame. So it's struggling with it, but this is, a known problem with LVGL, so is a factor we consider when we're designing screens. When we put this exact same setup and the same size on the P4, we can see immediately how much smoother it is. You probably see a perceived color difference here, but it's because I have the brightness of this up at 100%, whereas this is only at 50%. But we can see we're not getting any of that jankiness that we're getting over here. This 7 frames per second is now up to 23 frames per second and running anything between 40, 50, 60% CPU on the way up. But when it comes down, it does still go up occasionally and spike to 99 to 100% CPU. But it is definitely doing things way more smoothly than we were getting on the S3. But what happens when we push this one to a similar limit? This one's struggling because it's taking up the entire size of the screen. It's maxing out its frame buffer. What happens when we take this one and we bring it all the way out to this 800 by 800 screen? Does it suffer a similar fate? Well, let's give that a go. There we go, a much bigger version, optimizing on this big screen. And is it struggling? Yes, yes it is. We can see that the CPU here is up at 90 to 100%, and the frame rate has dropped right down to 18 frames per second. But that 18 frames per second is still considerably smoother than we're running over here at like a consistent 7 frames a second. And even though this is being forced to create a buffer that is almost the entire size of the screen, it's still doing it relatively well. The smoothness, if we can imagine this in a car kind of going up and coming down, I think would be acceptable given this kind of UI. You know, I don't necessarily use ARCs all that much myself because I think there are often better ways of presenting this data. But if you were to use something like this, I think this would be absolutely acceptable in the car. That I wouldn't run, and there's a lot of reasons why I don't use ARCs, and this is one of them, but this would do. This would be sufficiently smooth, I think. So this is handling an ARC just fine. How would it do if we, say, put 3 of these on and then, you know, offset them so that they're all animating and stuff? Is it going to drop this even further, considering the fact that we're already utilizing pretty much an entire size screen frame buffer? Let's add 2 more arcs onto this one and see what it does. Right, 3 arcs doing their thing, all different sizes, all different offset of delays. And I've made them a little bit inconsistently spaced, but whatever. It's showing what we need to do. And it is dropping the FPS again down from 18 to about 15 and running at the maximum 100% CPU. But it is still decently smooth. It is what I would consider usable. And I have a feeling that for this kind of display, this 15 FPS is about as low as we're ever going to get, no matter what we put on this screen. Because at the moment, it is utilizing a full screen frame buffer. So every single time anything is changing on there, it's not just redrawing part of the screen, it's redrawing the entire thing. So to be able to push it to this extent and get all this information on there, yet still be able to pull out 15 FPS from it, I think is actually not too bad. Now, it's well documented on this channel, amongst other places, that LVGL is not super optimized for some of its component types. In particular, these ones that we're running here, meters and scales, which when they have lots of ticks around the outside edge, cause full screen buffering and they cause lots of slowdown that we really have to be cautious around when building gauges because you need to use them sparingly. And it seems that that's still the case when we're utilizing this P4 board. But it is interesting that no matter what we throw at it, it seems to be able to handle it in a way that is acceptable for the kind of use that we're going to be putting them in. I'm going to be using 3 of these front and center in my 350Z in order to replace the 3 big screens. So I'm personally invested in them being very reliable because they're literally going to hold my life, well, my driving license in their hands. One thing that we have to bear in mind right now is the P4 as a chip is brand new. There's almost zero documentation. There's almost zero specification about what it's capable of out there, and almost nobody's managed to get their hands on them, which means they're very unoptimized, and there's probably still a ton of performance gain to be pulled out of them that we don't know about yet, and we actually haven't had the time to dig into and make them work as well as they can possibly work. I'm sure that over the next months, as people start to get their hands on these boards more, there are going to be libraries and optimizations and plugins and all these kinds of things created that make these things perform significantly better than they do now. Currently, they're very bleeding edge and very unknown. So, you know, of course, there are going to be issues. But these things do open up another world of possibilities that we don't currently have in any Arduino board, like the fact that I can have this run as a speedo gauge front and center in my car, and then as soon as I click it into reverse, it becomes my reversing camera. Being able to do stuff like that in the Arduino ecosystem, I think is very cool. And I'll have some examples of that very, very soon. Literally in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to start building some real use cases for this and actually going to have it installed in a car sometime next month. So it's not going to be long until you get to see these actually practically working in an automotive environment alongside my own ultimate gauge boards for the little gauges, because they're going to be here very soon. Pre-orders of my boards are basically sold out now. So yeah, not many left, which is incredible. Thank you for everybody for all the support on that. It's been insane. So yeah, that's a first look at the ESP32 P4 powered 3.4-inch touchscreen from Waveshare. Yeah, we didn't use the touchscreen bit, but you know how touchscreen works. Like I said, these things are brand new. There's absolutely nothing out there about them at the moment, and they've only gone on to Waveshare website to become available in literally the last couple of days. I'm relatively confident that if you click the link below to go and take a look at them, they're probably on back order. But I have been informed that they are getting lots more of them very soon. So if you stick them onto back order, I'm sure it won't be too long till you're able to get these boards and screens yourself to have a play with. And like I said, they come in two flavors, the 3.4-inch and the 4-inch, which is, like I say, effectively the same, but 10-ish% bigger. What I would like to know is there anything you would like to see running on this thing other than Doom? Would we like to see Doom running on it? Yeah, I think we could probably get Doom running on it. But is there any practical example that you might be interested in seeing that I can facilitate whilst we wait for more of these things to become available? If so, let me know in the comments and I'll pick a couple of the best ones and we'll actually make them over the next few weeks and show off a bit more of what this thing can actually do. Otherwise, I'd love to know what you think of these things, and I'm sure the team over at Waveshare would love to read your comments, and I know they do read the comments on these videos, so make sure you stick your thoughts down below so it can get back to the team. That's it for this one. Whatever you do with the rest of your day, folks, have a wicked one, and I'll see you in the next video Wednesday at 2 p.m. Take it easy, peeps. Bye-bye.